A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to some more films I should have talked about years ago. So here we go. I've talked about The Money Pit yesterday, but that came out in 1986. But now it's time to move on to something that came out 9 years later. The same exact year that a boatload of well-known films out there, like Clueless, Apollo 13, and of course, Toy Story, were all released in. That's right, I'm talking about yet another film that was released in 95, called, well, Se7en. Yeah. It's basically similar to many other films out there where they happen to use a number in the middle of the one-worded title. So, off the top of my head, there are at least a few other unique examples that happen to follow this sort of titular cliche. But Se7en, yeah, that's what I'm going to be calling it, because how else am I going to be pronouncing something like that? I feel like is yet another good example of an underrated classic by any means. This film was released in September 1995, and let me tell you about the cast. It is jam-packed with well-known names, familiar faces left and right. Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Kevin Spacey, and even R. Lee Ermey, whom you might remember as Sergeant Hartman from Full Metal Jacket. So, by any means, this one right here does set to be a pretty good example, but if I were to explain this plot line itself, then here's how I would explain it best. A retired police officer known as William Somerset. Yeah, I seem to be reading off of this because I only just watched it and yet I'm already forgetting about a lot. Because I just don't really seem to catch on a lot about this. Because, let me just tell you, first off, yeah, seems to be my own teleprompter right here. But anyways, former police officer William Somerset, who is played by Morgan Freeman, ends up attempting to tackle one final case along with some assistants. Brad Pitt, who basically accompanies alongside Freeman's character, pretty much renouncing the sort of buddy cop cliche that was best known in films like Lethal Weapon and RoboCop, and basically trying to bring it to a whole new audience, in a whole new generation. This was just several years after the events of these kinds of films out there where the buddy cop cliche was basically at its prominence, has not necessarily met with such glamour. But Se7en does go and try to make the buddy cop cliche a lot better than it used to be. And I feel like that both the box office results as well as the many ratings that are given on by various platforms out there, like an 8.6 out of 10 on IMDb, 81% on Rotten Tomatoes, 65% on Metacritic, and various other results out there. So you can pretty much say that it's basically a set of mixed reviews, and therefore this film happens to be a mixed bag. But this kind of mixed bag is probably not necessarily filled with steak and potatoes, but it is in fact met with at least a few other unique challenges by any means. It happens to try and pick out rare pucks of meat tartare, extremely expensive North Korean black garlic, but it also does try to at least bring out a bunch of whole other things. But the big thing that it tries to get is a whole pound of durian fruit. So if you're not familiar with the kind of analogies that I have been presenting out as a way of comparing these films, then well, just go watch anything from Cinemassacre Video and you'll basically see the kind of philosophy that generates from them, whereas here, I like to stick with the facts, not philosophy. Se7en is probably not necessarily for everybody. At least that's how I see it. I myself am a fan of most of these actors. R. Lee Ermey is a legend when it comes to portraying a drill sergeant. With Morgan Freeman, anything pretty much goes. This is one of those people whom you can definitely trust. For a guy who's still alive, well in 80s, in terms of age, Freeman certainly does still know how to hold out for all of us. Longtime fans of Morgan Freeman are going to look back in awe-inspiring fashion, knowing that Freeman's career went from being a somewhat simple minor role to being an unbelievable legend, enough to combat the likes of various other well-known legends in terms of acting, like Mark Landau, Orson Welles, and even good old Mike Myers, whom also is still alive, but still. Se7en is not necessarily one of those films that I will say is for all those kinds of people. Anyone who's a fan of these actors, anyone who's a fan of the classic buddy cop cliche now being brought into the mid-90s, anyone who's a fan of detective work or whodunit based works may not see everything entertaining about this one. But yet I myself was only able to catch a small glimpse of this film anyway, so that would make the reason why I'm not really going to be able to talk very much about this film, also because it's not available on HBO Max anymore for some reason. So that's probably going to be about it for this one. Se7en, the way I see it, or the way I tried to see it, gets a score of maybe 6.0 at best. So again, I will try to say that it's underrated for what it is, but yet I couldn't really see everything come together the way I was hoping for. With a great cast and a somewhat convincing storyline, I'm not ultimately in for it. Maybe you might, but I don't really see everything the way I saw with other films out there. So that's just going to be how I'm going to end this one for today. But don't worry, because I'm going to be into way more familiar territory starting with tomorrow's topic. But if you want to see more go down on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.